That was my fault. 네, Father, Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. So today we'll go through Genesis chapter 29. Does anyone know where we're at currently? Does anyone remember where we're at, what we're looking at, the story? Does anyone remember a guy called Jacob? Yes, people are awake, inshallah. So we're in the story of Jacob. In the last two chapters, we had a very interesting thing happen. Sorry, this is quite... Okay. A very interesting thing happens in Jacob's life, and this rest of his story is pretty much based on this single event. And this event is his confrontation, or not his confrontation, it's him stealing the birthright from his brother Esau. And pretty much every other event that's about to happen in his life comes from this one thing, which happens in chapter 27. Can someone run down that story very quickly? Like, what happens? Someone, please. What happens, Mark? Tell me. What happens with Jacob and Esau? Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much. That's pretty much the story. It's very simple. It's actually very interesting. Something we might miss is that Jacob rightfully, in some sense, had earned the birthright. When we say rightfully, it's sort of a trick. So what happens one day, this is in chapter 26. Chapter 26. You have Esau comes from the field, the guy's dead, he's been hunting all day, this guy's working hard, and he sees that his brother's made a stew of, what do they call ats, pretty much, like equivalent to ats nowadays, right? And he's like, bro, I'm starving, can you give me a bowl of your food? Like, I can't, like, I need to eat now or I'll die. And his brother turns to him, like, okay, I'll do it on one condition, you sell me the birthright. And the guy's like, well, who's this idiot asking this question? Of course, just take it, just give me the food. Like, I don't care about what you're saying, right? And that, like, we've had situations like that, right? It's like, bro, I don't care what I have to do, inshallah, give me the food, I'm starving. Like, it's a joke between brothers or something stupid between brothers, right? But Jacob sort of took this as something serious and took this as a promise from Esau. And Esau sort of didn't think much of it, and he sort of thought very lightly of his birthright. And then much later on, down the track, we don't know time frame, you have this event where Esau goes out to hunt, and before he goes out to hunt, his father's told him, look, I think I'm about to die. Let me give you the blessing of the firstborn before I pass away. Go hunt some food for me, come back and make me that stew that I love that you make. So he goes out to hunt. His mom hears it, so Rebecca hears this and goes to Jacob, says, quickly, I have this plan for you. I made the stew for your father. I want you to steal the birthright from your brother. And Jacob's like, I'm not like my brother. How am I going to trick him? I'm not hairy. Like, this guy's a wild man. I don't sound like him. Like, so many things are different. So his mom's like, get the hair, put it on your arms, take the stew, go to your father, just use your voice. He's not going to realize he's half blind anyway, and do this. So Jacob steals the birthright in this way, leaves the tent, and then Esau, having finished the hunt, comes back, and he's prepared the stew and done all these things, and he's ready to get his birthright from his father. And his father realizes what's happened, and he says, son, I can't give you the same blessing. It's done. And Esau, from that moment, put it in his heart to say, the second my father passes away, like, it's not in those exact words, but the intent is that the second my father passes away, I'm going to kill this guy, like, for what he's done, for stealing my birthright. So his mother Rebecca, knowing this is going to happen, tells him, look, you're going to have to run. I want you to go to, I forget what the place is called, Padan Aram, which is in the land of Haran, which is where Abraham, I think, was originally from. He's from the land of Ur. Haran is one of the places that was like outside of Canaan, which was the land promised to him. So this is originally where they would have come from. Would have been Ur or Haran. So he tells him, go find the wife from over there and run because your brother's going to get you. That's chapter 27. Chapter 28, you then have another big event in Jacob's life. Does anyone know? Guy sleeps on a rock, sees something while he's sleeping on a rock. There's a very famous thing called Jacob's what? Yeah, Jacob's ladder, right? So you have this guy, Jacob, is fleeing from his country. He's sort of stolen the birthright in a very deceitful way, right? Like, I don't think you would honor that kind of deal. It's like, bro, you just gave me a bowl of food so you can steal everything from me. Like, it's not a deal you would honor. It's quite a deceitful one, and like, Personally, I don't think Jacob's in the right for doing it. Like, I think it's a bit deceptive. It's a bit like cunning, conniving, like under the rug kind of behavior. So it's not a great start to his story. And then you have Jacob's ladder, right? And Jacob's ladder is very interesting because it seems that God has accepted the fact that he's received the birthright and blesses him. If I think it's verse 20. So chapter 28, verse 20. Sorry if I don't mind coming back. Wait, so I go back. Sorry, I got the wrong verse. I'll just go back. Go back to, we see the part where God's talking to him. Yeah, that one. Sorry. Also your descendants, so this is God speaking to Jacob. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth, you shall spread abroad to the west and to the east, the north and the south. And in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Which is a very similar blessing to the one God gives to Abraham himself. Right? So it's like God has taken this thing, which doesn't seem good at first glance, and he actually blesses him. Like God actually takes this and says, you know what? Let's go with the flow kind of thing. But not really. But he blesses Jacob in the same way he blesses Abraham and Isaac. And the very interesting thing we learned from that, you probably spoke about it last week, but I think it's interesting to point out again, is that God takes even our stupidity and makes good of it. Right? Like Jacob did something very dodgy. Yeah? This is something he shouldn't be doing. Like he stole birthright of his brother. Literally, he's broken his friendship or his relationship with his brother. But God still uses that. Because what was in Jacob's heart? If you keep going to verse 20. Jacob makes a vow to the Lord. Right? His vow is, if God will be with me and keep me in this way, and the translation might be different, sorry. Keep me in this way that I am going and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. Right? He's actually asking for very simple things. He's a very simple man. He literally said, if God will protect me, give me bread and clothing, and bring me back in peace to my father, he will be my God. It's not a very tough condition, right? Like with God, we sometimes put conditions. It's like, if you let me get this job, if you let me marry this person, if you let me do that, then I'll accept you as my God and I'll be happy with everything you give me. But this guy's like, just give me clothing, food, bring me back in peace, you'll be my God. Whereas his brother, you already see very early on, he really doesn't care for it. Like he doesn't follow after God. He even goes and marries a Canaanite woman just to spite his father, to spite God. And that's the difference, that although Jacob did deceive Esau's brother and stole the birthright in a way that wasn't good, he was actually wanting to follow God. He was open to following God, which is why he was blessed. Okay, and this brings us to chapter 29. Okay, there's going to be a big slab of text. Who's happy to read verses 1 to 14?
So Jacob went on his journey and came to the lands of the people of the east. And he looked and saw a well in the fields, and behold, there were 3 flocks of sheep lying by it. For out of that well they water the flocks. A large stone was on the well's mouth. Now all the flocks would be gathered there, and they would roll the stone from the well's mouth, water the sheep, and put the stone back in its place on the well's mouth. And Jacob said to them, my brethren, where are you from? And they said, we are from Haran. Then he said to them, do you know Laban the son of Nahor? And they said, we know him. So he said to them, is he well? And they said, he is well. And look, his daughter Rachel is coming with the sheep. Then he said, look, it is still high day. It is not time for the cattle to be gathered together. Water the sheep and go and feed them. But they said, we cannot until all the flocks are gathered together. And they have rolled the stone from the well's mouth. Then we water the sheep. Now while he was still speaking with them, Rachel came with her father's sheep, for she was a shepherdess. And it came to pass when Jacob saw Rachel, the daughter of Laban, his mother's brother, and the sheep of Laban, his mother's brother, that Jacob went near and rolled the stone from the well's mouth, and watered the flock of Laban, his mother's brother. Then Jacob kissed Rachel and lifted up his voice and wept. And Jacob told Rachel that he was her father's relative, and that he was Rebekah's son. So he ran and told her father. Then it came to pass, when Laban heard the report about Jacob's sister's son, that he ran to meet him, and embraced him and kissed him, and brought him to his house. So he told Laban all these things. And Laban said to him, surely you are my bone and my flesh. And he stayed with him for a month.
Awesome. What's happened there? Recap, any details that stood out, anything that people found interesting? Please, someone talk. Anything? Okay, we'll run it down then. We'll run it down. So what's happened here? You have Jacob. This is after Jacob's ladder, after that whole event. He's now gone towards the land he was told to go to. And he goes and by chance, he meets his relatives or people serving under his relative Laban, who's his uncle, at the well with their sheep. Now, it's very interesting whenever something happens at a well. In the Old Testament, New Testament, for a Jew. Why do you think that is? Someone must have heard this before. What happens at wells? Good Samaritan. Has anyone heard like any Bible study on the Good Samaritan? Or sorry, on the Good Samaritan woman? What happens at wells? Like, it's the equivalent of the local pickup joint, right? If a guy is single and is trying to find a wife, he goes to the well, right? So it's been a well, like this is the setup. Like this is like, okay, this is how Jacob's going to find his wife, okay? So he goes to the well. Now, we could go down that path and talk about how to pick up women at a well. We're not doing that. We're not doing that. But I'm going to connect it to another story in the New Testament. And it's actually, as we'll go through, understand that actually the church fathers, whenever they look at this story, they point it directly towards Christ for many reasons. Most obvious is the idea of the story of the Samaritan woman. A few details I didn't notice till I actually reread this. When are they going to water the sheep? What time of the day? You can find, I think, if you go back. No, sorry, keep going. Verse 7. High day. What's high day? I wouldn't say evening. Not evening, no. High day. Think about high. When something is very high up in the sky, the sun is very high up in the sky. What time of day is that normally? Not morning. What's the hottest part of the day? Midday, right? What else happens at midday? Christ visits the Samaritan, or meets the Samaritan woman, right? Exactly. It's exactly the same time. And in the Samaritan woman's story, the reason she goes so late, by the way, the reason you don't go during that time is you'll get burnt, like you'll get scorched. Like when the sun's that high in the sky, if you ever played tennis and it's a summer day and you go when the sun's out like that, you're stuffed. Like you'll come out burnt, like you won't be able to survive. It's the worst time of the day to be out. The Samaritan woman goes during that time to avoid people. The reason why these shepherds are out at this time of day, we don't know. Like it doesn't really make sense they'll be out at this time of day. It doesn't make sense at all. Now, there could be reasons, but if we read Christ into the story, it's very interesting to pick this time. Because another thing that also happens at midday, happens at the 6th hour, is Christ's crucifixion. Right? If anyone's read the book by Brand Pitre, I think Jesus the Bridegroom, he makes a big point of connecting the Samaritan woman's story to the crucifixion. Right? Because in the Samaritan woman's story, a man meeting a woman at a well normally leads to a wedding. With Christ, it leads to a wedding, but not the normal type. It leads to a wedding of him to his church, which is fulfilled on the cross. And it's the same thing here where Jacob, as a figure of Christ, goes to meet Rachel at the well at midday, at the time of the day when it's hot, at the same time when the crucifixion would have happened, and he meets Rachel. And church fathers reading this look into this and say, we are Rachel and Jacob is Christ to us, right? Where he comes to the well at the heat of the day when there's no one there to roll back the stone to give us water, when no one's able to fill us with his everlasting water, and he comes and takes the stone away. By the way, they make a point of pointing out that Jacob rolls away a stone that would have taken multiple men to move, right? Because they're saying we're waiting for people to come and move the stone. If you're waiting for people to come and move the stone, it means they themselves can't do it. It's too heavy. And Jacob goes and literally takes the stone. Of course, he hears Rachel's there. So he goes and carries the stone and moves it away, right? Not the first time a guy's done something crazy to impress a woman, but if you're reading the story of Christ into this, it's this idea of Christ rolling away the stone of the grave, rolling away the stone of the tomb, and giving us his everlasting water, right? And giving us that life. And then at the end of verse 14, you have that, you can tell now that Jacob is interested in Rachel, but he spends a month doing nothing, right? He goes to his uncle Laban's house and spends a month just doing nothing. He doesn't make a move, he doesn't try to do anything, just spends a month there. And I could think of a few reasons. The first reason is he's probably going to have to live here because he's fleeing away from his house and he doesn't want to go back to see Esau because Esau, if he sees him, will likely kill him. But another reason is if we go back to verse 20, you don't have to go back, but chapter 28, verse 20, where he goes to God and he actually says to him, if God will be with me and keep me in this way that I'm going and give me bread to eat and clothing to put on so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. This is what he's wanting. He's gone to this house, gone to Laban's house, and he's found a place he can stay. Found a place where he can have food, he can have rest, right? So I'm guessing like he's going with the flow. Like the God who brought him to this moment, the God who's brought him through this, and even despite his desire to steal the birthright, and which is sort of a bit wrong, God still sends him along and says, your descendants will be as the stars, I can't remember which one he chooses here, but he gives the same promise he gives to Abraham. He's going with the flow. He's letting God carry him. Okay. The next section is verses 15 to 30, but we'll break it up. Can we read, please, verses 15 to 20?
Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the older was Leah, and the name of the younger was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful of form and appearance. Now Jacob loved Rachel, so he said, I will serve you 7 years for Rachel, your younger daughter. And Laban said, it is better that I give her to you than that I should give her to another man. Stay with me. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her.
Okay, awesome. Anything that stood out in those verses? Anything anyone liked? No? Okay. A few things to note. So we have the description of Laban's daughters, right? Now the description is not the greatest of Leah, right? So what's the thing? What does he say about Rachel? So he had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah, and the name of the young was Rachel. Leah's eyes were delicate, but Rachel was beautiful in form and appearance. Now, when he says that Leah's eyes are delicate, there's sort of a few ways we can think about it. So some people have contemplated to say like she had soft eyes and that she was actually beautiful as her sister was. It was just a way of describing to say that she didn't have favor in the eyes of Jacob, right? But others, and this seems to be the more general way to think about it, is that it's pretty much to say there was nothing else you could say that was nice. This is going to sound very bad. That was nice about her. So all you could say was she had delicate eyes. To say she wasn't good looking, and some even take it as far as to say she had a blemish in her eyes, which was, yeah. So it's not a very nice description of Leah. And to add to that, and I don't know why she was named this, the name Leah itself means faulty or blemished, which is already musiba soda. But I don't know why Laban called his daughter that. And Rachel's name is a she-goat or a ewe or a female lamb. And so the church fathers, when they read this, when they look at the character of Rachel, what do you think of when you think of Christ and a sheep? What do we normally go straight to? The Good Shepherd, right? We go to the Good Shepherd. And it's this idea that Christ goes after this sheep, right? Same way that Jacob loves Rachel, and as we'll see, or as we have seen, is willing to serve 7 years for her. Christ is willing to go to any extent for us, right? To us, he's more precious than Rachel is to Jacob. He's so much more precious. We are so much more precious to Christ than we realize. And we take it for granted. We really take it for granted. We always, when things go wrong in our lives, what's the first thing we say? Why God? As if God is the problem. As if he is the reason for why things are going bad in our lives. And it's honestly, he's not. Because if we are worried about the situation we're in, if we want to get through it and we want things to work out for good for us, God wants the same. Even more so. Like in the same way, actually it's really funny. If you guys have a dog, you realize how dumb dogs are, right? And the dogs don't know what's good for them. If you leave food out in front of a dog, even if it's going to make them sick and it's way too much food for them, they'll keep eating. Like they won't stop, right? And sometimes as the owner, you have to go to the dog, what are you doing? Take the food away, and they'll look up at you sad thinking they want more food. But you know for them, that is a terrible thing to do right now. Right? If they eat any more food, they'll get fat, they'll have health problems, they'll vomit, blah, 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 blah. Right? It's the same with God and us. We're that stupid dog, right? We're that dog who doesn't know what's good for us. Like we keep eating of the world. We keep eating of the things we want. We keep following our desires, keep doing this, keep doing that, assuming it's the right thing for us. But it's not. And God knows that. And because God knows that and loves us more than we love ourselves, he has to do certain things sometimes. He has to take things away from us so we can learn to attach ourselves to him and not the world, not ourselves, not our own ideas. Right? Another amazing thing is that Jacob is so willing to work 7 years in another man's house. 7 years as pretty much a slave, as a shepherd in this guy's house for Rachel, right? And it says the description is as if, I'll get the exact wording because it's a lot nicer. Let me just find it. So Jacob served 7 years for Rachel, is verse 20, and they seemed only a few days to him because of the love he had for her. 7 years, only a few days. Right? If I look back 7 years is a long time. A lot has happened in 7 years, right? And to him, it was nothing, right? I don't know how, I'll be honest with you. Like, I don't know how he could love someone for that long and just 7 years becomes nothing to him. But it's an amazing thing. And more so the love of God for us. More so the love of God for us. It's even more than that. An illustration which I've probably overused multiple times. I don't know if you guys have heard it. But it was this illustration that I heard, I think, in Passion Week a few years ago. And it goes like this. You have Adam and Eve. They've been in darkness for millennia, right? They stuffed up, they fell, they're dead, and they're sitting in Hades like, okay, our lives is just this now. I'm just looking into a black tunnel, there's nothing around me, I have no light, it's all darkness. And all of a sudden, Adam sees a light. He sees a light. And this light, like, it's the first time in thousands of years he's seen a light. Like, at this point, he's forgotten what a light is. And he's looking at this light and he's like, when was there a light in hell? When did this happen? And slowly, this light gets brighter and closer, and he's like, what is happening? Like, I've never seen this happen in thousands of years. And as the light comes right next to him, comes up close to him, he realizes the light is Christ. And he looks at him, is like, how did you even dare to come here? How did you even dare to come here? Like, I brought myself here. This is my fault. This is my fault. Like, I disobeyed you. I decided to go against you and choose my own lust. How did you dare to even come to this level? And Christ in our own lives will come to that level. We don't realize. We assume that I've done things that make me unfit for God. I have done things that don't allow me to come to God. But if Christ will go to that extent, will go down that far for us, then there's no level that's too deep. There's nothing too deep for him. Another thing I was hearing recently was actually it was a talk about shame. And the one thing that we deal with a lot in our spiritual lives is shame. It's a thing that makes it hard for us to see God, to actually want God, right? Because we do something, we think we're too ashamed to face God, and so we hide from him. So we choose to follow the lust of the world. We choose to follow these things because it's the only way we know how to cover up. Because that's the only way we know how to cover up. But if we learn to deal with a bit of our shame, to realize just how bad we are, but just how much God still loves us, it fixes a lot of the problems in our spiritual lives. And there's like a Catholic nun who used to pray, Lord, help me deal with even a little bit of my shame. Right? If you can learn to pray like that and actually deal with this problem that we all deal with, right? Because no one knows us except God. Only God sees how stuffed up we are, right? But he accepts it. Pretty much to say, if you find your spiritual life is very dry, and we all go through this, I the first, like we all go through this, we have very big slumps in our spiritual lives. If we feel like we have that, then we need to learn to recognize the love of God for us. We need to learn to spend more time with him. Like in the same way that Jacob would spend 7 years waiting for Rachel, and it felt like nothing to him. When we learn to have that relationship with God, when we learn to enjoy his presence, the days feel like nothing. The days don't feel numbered. They just feel like they pass, and it feels like nothing. It feels like you just enjoy it so much it doesn't matter to you. Okay. Can we please read verses 21 to 30?
Then Jacob said to Laban, "Give me my wife, for my days are fulfilled, that I may go in to her." And Laban gathered together all the men of the place and made a feast. Now it came to pass in the evening that he took Leah his daughter and brought her to Jacob, and he went into her. And Laban gave his maid Zilpah to his daughter Leah as a maid. So it came to pass in the morning that, behold, it was Leah. And he said to Laban, "What is this you have done to me? Was it not for Rachel that I served you? Why then have you deceived me?" Then Laban said, "It must not be done so in our country to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and we will give you this one also for the service which you will serve with me still another 7 years." Then Jacob did so and fulfilled her week. So he gave him his daughter Rachel as wife also. And Laban gave his maid Bilhah to his daughter Rachel as a maid. Then Jacob also went into Rachel, and he also loved Rachel more than Leah, and he served with Laban still another 7 years.
Awesome. What stood out there? There's a few things that happened there. What stood out? Or what is what makes you think what's going on here? One thing for me is just how stupid Jacob seems to be, right? Like, how does he completely get the wrong person? Like, how does he see Leah and assume Leah is Rachel? Like, well, what happened there? Like, that's stuffed. Like, how could he's been following this girl for 7 years and somehow confuses her for her sister? Like, what's going on here? So what used to happen is during the wedding feast, the woman would actually be covered with a very thick veil in those days. So he wouldn't actually have been able to see who it was, firstly. And secondly, when it was at night, it was dark, he didn't see who it was, right? So it's sort of like you can sort of let that go. He probably was a bit drunk from the wedding as well. Like a few things added up all together. Fair enough, right? Fair enough. But it's interesting that Jacob, the guy who tricked his own brother, is now tricked by Laban. It's sort of like what goes around comes around kind of thing. Of course, that led not to be the lesson because it doesn't always happen, but it sort of comes full circle, right? But Jacob, he earned the birthright for tricking Esau, I don't know how to say it properly, is now tricked by Laban to get the woman he wants, to marry the woman he wants. And it's interesting, you don't really see Jacob get upset. Like he tells him off, is like, "What is this that you've done here? Like, you know why I was serving you," right? He says that to him, and he's tricked. Like, he's outright tricked. But he doesn't really go on to complain, because all he says after that, if I can just find it. Jacob goes to Laban, "Why then have you deceived me?" Laban replied, "It must not be done so in our country, to give the younger before the firstborn. Fulfill her week, and I'll give you this one also for the service you will render me still another 7 years." And Jacob, once he hears that, doesn't even complain. So like, not only has he served 7 years, he's now about to serve another 7 to be able to marry Rachel. And again, to him, it's like nothing. A few points to note out. So, when they say fulfill her week, a week is 7 days, and it's pretty much just a way of saying 7 years. Fulfill her week as to fulfill 7 years. What is not clear actually is whether he gets to marry Rachel and then has to serve another 7 years, or serves the 7 years first and then marries Rachel. That's not really clear. But what is very clear is that Jacob is willing to bear all things, like for Rachel. And it reminded me of 1 Corinthians chapter 13, where it says, "Love bears all things." Right? Love bears all things. Which is not the fluffy way we think of love, right? It's not the fluffy way we think of love. When we think of love, we think of, oh, he gave me roses on Valentine's Day. Oh, he took me out to this very nice dinner. He did this, he did that. From a guy's perspective, it's sacrifice, right? So it's this idea he bears all things. Like, he's willing to bear this because he loves Rachel. And it's a very practical point, right? So love is not just fluffy. Love is tough, right? There's tough things you have to face, like in a relationship, for example. There's tough things you have to face together. There's tough things you have to go through. And if you can't bear things in that relationship and it falls down and everything breaks apart, it's not love. It was infatuation. Like, if you're willing to love the person, you're willing to bear all things. Of course, there are limits. I'm not saying everything's okay, no. But there are things like the simple things of life, the simple annoyances of life. You should be willing to bear those through with the other person, right? And again, if you turn this to Christ, as the church fathers do, love bears all things, right? To the cross, love bears all things. It's always funny in the wedding ceremony when the guy will always laugh that the woman has to obey him and has to smile in his face, blah, 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 blah. And I think we should laugh more when the guy is told to be like Christ, because that is 50 times worse and is like the hardest thing. Like, how can you live up to Christ? How? You can't live up to Christ. You really can't. Like, who's willing to be sacrificed for the sake of anyone, right? Even their wife. Who? And Christ did it. Okay. Any questions or comments? Anything anyone liked there? The girls probably want to slap me out after what I said, but it's okay. Anything? Okay, awesome. Could we please read verses 31 to 35?
When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. So Leah received and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben, for she said, "The Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now therefore my husband will love me." Then she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "Because the Lord has heard that I am unloved, he has therefore given me this son also." And she called his name Simon. Then she conceived again and bore a son, and she said, "Now this time my husband will become attached to me, because I have borne him 3 sons." Therefore his son was called Levi. And she conceived again and bore a son, and said, "I will praise the Lord." Therefore she called his name Judah. Then she stopped bearing.
Okay, so sort of try and make sense of that, because sort of like they say names, it's because of this. So the firstborn son Reuben, which it says, "Behold a son." Sorry, the name itself literally means "behold a son." The word Reuben. So when she says, "The Lord has surely looked on my humiliation. Now therefore my husband will love me." Sorry, I got the wrong one. Yes, so that was the right one. "The Lord has surely looked on my humiliation. Now therefore my husband will love me." And this son is literally named "Behold a son," right? Why would Jacob love her? Because she bore him a son. Think typical Arab mentality, a firstborn son, right? Like that's what he wanted. So she assumes, like, behold a son, now this will bring joy to the father, he will love me now. That's what she assumed would happen. The second son, Simeon, his name literally means God hears. He hears or God hears. And it's this idea of he hears Leah's distress. So the phrase is, because the Lord heard I was hated, he has therefore given me this son also, so he called his name Simeon. Right? That's where the name comes from. The third son, Levi, means united or joined. So pretty much to say, okay, now I'll be joined to my husband because I've given him 3 sons, he should be happy now. And then the last one, his name is Judah, which means praise. Right? And she's praising God. Now I've heard a few commentaries and thoughts on the names. What is very clear is that Leah feels very unloved. That's what's very clear. And Leah thought she would get Jacob to love her if she bore him sons, because as we see, Rachel can't give him sons, can't give him children, and she put all her hope in this. Right? She put all her hope in this. She bore him the first son. She said, "Behold, the son. He should be happy now." Nothing changed. He still loved Rachel. Second one, God hears. Like, God hears my prayer. He's given me Simeon, so now he will love me. He still doesn't love her. Then gives her Levi. I'll be united and joined to him now. He can't say anything. I have 3 sons. Still, he loves Rachel. And the last one, praise God. Pretty much Judah, praise to God. Now some will say this is Leah's progression, that she's learning to be okay with the fact that, which is not a great thing, that Jacob doesn't love her. Like being okay with the fact that he might not love me, but God does, right? But if we see later in the next chapter, it's sort of, to be honest, it's very sad. Like Leah's story is very sad. And it shows what happens when someone's unloved. And her father, it wasn't a great thing that he did what he did. Because she ends up spiraling. And it's a lesson for us that when we start relying on other things, when we start putting our hope in things that, hoping against hope when we shouldn't, this is what can happen. When we try and take our eyes off God and try and put our hope in things that are temporary, things that are transient, like they don't last, it leads us to spiral. If, for example, I put all my hope in my friend, right? It's like, oh, everyone else hates me, but it's me and my friend against the world. And the second that friend I don't know, like you fall out of friendship. Oh, I'm sorry, but you fall out of friendship, or something happens, like your whole world collapses because you thought your whole identity was that person. In a relationship, same thing happens. I know people who come out of long-term relationships and just trying to recover is tough. Trying to recover is tough because the whole identity was in that person. People get divorced. Like, it's a tough thing for them. But those kind of people experience those kind of things. I've seen it go two ways. I've seen it, they spiral and they try and find other things in life to satisfy them, and you find that they're not happy. They never find happiness again. And then there's the people who, when all of these things are gone, they seek God, right? They praise God. They have a Judah in their life. It does something. Like I've seen people recover from the craziest things because they've sought God. It's unbelievable. And it's something we shouldn't wait till something catastrophic in our lives happens to do that. We should do that now. Actually, I was talking to a friend over this weekend at a Bucks, actually. And we were talking about this idea of remember the Lord in the days of your youth. That in your youth, remember Him. Because when these things happen, when things fall apart later on in life, you had God from the start. You don't have to go through what Leah does, where she tries to convince herself and tries to praise God even though she's spiraling, because you would have had that from the start. So try to seek God and not be like Leah. And it's interesting, despite how bad Leah's circumstances seem to be, who comes from the line of Judah? A lion of the pride of Judah. Who's that? Christ, right? Despite this situation, despite how terrible everything seems here, what comes from it? Like, Leah actually ends up being the great whatever mother to Christ, right? She is in the lineage of Christ. It's to show that Christ, although man may forget, and although Jacob forgot, and although Laban stuffed up, God doesn't forget, right? And God gives joy when there was never joy. He can make joy out of the worst situations. Okay, that's pretty much everything I had. Any questions or comments? Nothing. Everyone's very quiet today. No? Okay, glory be to God for a moment.